right. We should be live. Yep.
We're good?
We're good. One time today.
All right. Well, hi, I am Billy Griffith with Emerging Revolutionary War, coming to you tonight live for our newest installment of our Rev War Revelry. Our special guest is somebody you know well from our group. It's our very own Phil Greenwalt, and we have him here tonight to discuss his brand new release, The Winter That Won the War. The Winter Encampment at Valley Forge, 1777 to 1778. This is the fourth book in the Savage Beatty's Emerging Revolutionary War series. So, Phil, welcome. And to start this off, I'd like to ask a question that I usually start off asking an author is, why write another book about Valley Forge?
Certainly. I mean, we all need another book, obviously, on bookshelves. I mean, we're all bookophiles and so forth. But actually, it stemmed from I actually visited the Valley Forge, and they have a great encampment store there, and they have all these books about the history from the tactic side to the full campaign to the women and the leaders and so forth, but not something that would be to fill that niche of where's that first book that kind of can get you into it, kind of to boost you into those other more detailed histories, more elaborate histories, the ones that really delve deep into it. And so the Emerging Revolutionary War series in general does that job of trying to give you that book that can both be a history book that you sit on your couch or in a recliner or read before bed, and then also take out onto the field to see the encampment. And so Valley Forge also has a lot of myths attached to it as well. And so trying to dig into that a little more and bring out actually where the kernels of truth were. And so and to get people to venture out into onto this hallowed ground and kind of underscore the mythology of why this was, I hate to use the word turning point because it's used so much these days, but one of these crossroads or intersections in the American Revolution.
All right, so you mentioned that with our books, they serve as a history and tour guides as well. So it's very important, as we're writing in this, we're supposed to project the power of place. So we have to have a familiarity with not just the site we're writing about, but the sites associated with it, since we're trying to create an easy access tour guide for the people reading it. So did you visit all these sites you include in your book before actually writing it?
No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I mean, from my early childhood, I'm very lucky. My father and mother were very big American history buffs, and so a lot of trips even would go to battlefields or historic sites. And we had an uncle that had a cabin in Adirondacks, and we would pick up 95. We would find detours along the way. So I've been to Valley Forge probably before I was even in first or second grade, way back when we lived in Baltimore. And so having the chance to go back, actually, one of the research trips, I took my younger brother, who is more interested in European history. So I took him to kind of see how the tour would work and so forth. And so we visited places associated with Baron Hill, the engagement there, Lafayette's battle in May of 1778. I have an uncle that lives in outside of Wilmington, Delaware. So I was advantaged there. And then working for the National Park Service at Morristown, another cold, bleak winter that the Revolutionary Army survived. Was able to take day trips down to visit certain sites, including standing at Fort Mifflin, almost underneath the planes of Philadelphia International Airport as it flew overhead. So been multiple times, and also was able to lead a bus tour or two there for different groups in the rain and in cold weather. So I got to kind of experience some of that wintry mix that is so associated with the Valley Forge winter.
All right, and now these books, they're obviously not easy to write. What challenges did you face while writing this? I know, like with my Mama book that came out last year, from its conception to its actual release, it was about a 3-year project. So these books definitely aren't written overnight.
No, certainly. Just like Monmouth, this book idea was conceived 2017, 2018. It was slated to come out last year, but there was something going on in the international arena. I think there was a little pandemic that affected all these publishers and so forth. So as it affected daily life, it also affected printing, publishing schedules, also travel schedules, research trips, and so forth. So there was the challenges, of that. Also the challenges of having a job in South Florida for the last few years. It's not like, oh, if you forget something, you can make a jaunt off the road to Valley Forge, being about a 20-hour drive from where I'm at now. The other challenge is that this is one of the first books in the Emerging Revolutionary War series, and also one of the probably one of just a few, and even in the Emerging Civil War series, that deals with not a person or an engagement. It deals with an encampment. And so how do you write about a 6-month time frame that most of it was bleak, most of it, there's only certain things going on throughout the encampment that would really stay at that 50,000 foot level? Obviously, you could delve into the suffering, the machinations of the political arena, but this is an introductory book. How do you stay above that realm? And so that was the challenge. How do you explain what's going on with those broad strokes that people have come to love with the Emerging Revolutionary War series? So the winter encampment, also tracing some of the routes, how the armies got there, also realizing that Valley Forge is not the only encampment throughout the winter. And also, where do you start? It's the winter that won the war, but you can't just plop the army down marching into Valley Forge on December 19th, 1777. So you've got to figure out where this story begins, and the campaign that leads there starts way up around northern New Jersey and the environs of New York City.
Okay, yeah, so we'll continue with kind of that aerial view that you were just giving, but with a broad brushstroke, paint us a picture of what the situation is for the American Army as the winter of 1777 began to approach.
Certainly. So if you backtrack slightly a little, obviously the British design was obviously a twofold kind of offensive strategy. John Burgoyne's force coming down the Hudson River corridor. Then William Howe's forces would leave New York, try to come around up the Delaware River, and then farther down afloat to the Chesapeake and land ahead of Elk in northern Maryland. Fight the largest land engagement there at size of forces at Brandywine on September 11th. Then kind of uncover Philadelphia in a series of maneuvers. And so Washington has a choice after Brandywine: is to uncover Philadelphia or uncover more of the interior of the state. And the colonial capital, yes, is important for symbolic reasons, but what's more important are the military supplies and the depots that are stored at places like Reading and York and Lancaster, places in the interior. So Washington chooses that to defend. And so he pulls out and he pulls back toward the interior, which gives up the capital of Philadelphia, which the British march in on September 26th. What is remarkable, though, and gets underplayed, obviously, with what's going on in New York, Saratoga is one of those turning points that we like to talk about as historians. But what really plays a major effect, too, is Washington's ill-fated attempt at Germantown on October 4th. Here, less than a month after the defeat at Brandywine, his army is able to take the field, and unfortunately, with weather or the decision to reverse course to what clogged in there, they're not successful. But it does play a part in the French court. They're very interested that Washington's army is able to take the field, and so you see Washington's army perched on the outside of Philadelphia after that, and then you have the last minor actions in early December, a place called White Marsh outside of Philadelphia as well, where Washington does not give up the high ground. Howe's trying to entice him into an engagement, but Washington stays behind his defenses. He then looks toward where to find this winter encampment. Coming up the Gulf Road, he brings his 12,000 man force in December 19th into a place called Valley Forge. It is obviously a valley of sorts. There's a ring of mountains around it. It is close to Philadelphia, being within probably 12 to 15 miles of downtown Philadelphia. So you can keep an eye on the British. It's close by, but it's also far enough away to detect any movement. It also shields the Continental Congress, which has removed itself from New York. It also shields the Pennsylvania government, which also has removed itself, obviously, from Philadelphia. But it's interesting, too, because Valley Forge has actually been a scene of a battle back in October as well, with guys with Alexander Hamilton there. Light Horse Harry Lee is also there. There's a raid by Knyphausen and the Hessian general to remove supplies, and Washington actually orders some of it burnt prior to the Hessians' arrival there. So there is, Washington is aware of it. It's also got what's very valuable to a winter encampment: lumber, woods. So you can use that because Washington knows that as anyone who studies history in the 18th century, winters are not a time of active campaigning. It's a time to kind of regroup, reassess, and plan for the future.
All right. So before we jump into the actual encampment, I have one kind of speculation question I want to ask you. 1776, the previous year, is kind of considered as the one year that the British really had a chance to win the war outright and destroy the Continental Army and bring the colonies back home to the mother country. But in 1777, too, these are dark defeats for Washington's Continental Army outside of Philadelphia. Well, there were successes in the north. Still, the destruction of the Continental Army around Philadelphia could have spelled doom for the American cause. Do you think that Howe missed an opportunity again, like he did the previous year, to potentially end the war?
I'm going to say no. I'll play the devil's advocate and say no. I mean, you look at the defeat at Brandywine, and it's so much different than the defeats around New York the year previous, or the retreat across New Jersey. Washington's army rallies quickly after Brandywine. They're defeated. They're not running from the field though. They hold up, and Howe doesn't have, that's a day-long engagement. I think it's a 12 or 15 mile flank march by Cornwallis's troops. So at New York, we see him hold up a lot. There's the flanking movements, but the routes to the battlefield aren't as long as the route at Brandywine. Then Washington is cagey from there on. I mean, Germantown, he finds a contingent. Washington, I think, is starting to learn a lesson in 1777, is that try to find the detachments, try to find, after the Brandywine battle, there's not another major battle for the rest of the September, October. I mean, Germantown is his full force against 8,000 British soldiers or so on the outskirts. Even prior to that, Howe gets frustrated in northern Jersey because Washington does not give up, not come in and entice him on the open field of battle. Howe also too is maybe loses a chance. I think his greatest chance would have stayed in New York and try to cut the Hudson River corridor if you really want to sever it. But it's also something I've tried to study even more in the speculation is you see so much in Europe that the capitals, once you conquer the capital, the war is over, or there is a suing for peace. But it doesn't happen in the rebellious colonies. And maybe that's because there's not a huge attachment to one city because the colonies are still continuing to evolve as a homogeneous 13 state type body thing. And so I think that kind of helps the American cause because Howe marches into Philadelphia, and instead of being game over, he's actually almost fighting for his life because of the forts guarding the Delaware and so forth. So Howe misses his opportunity by once he gets on the boats to head south to take the campaign. His best chance is to sever. I mean, destroy, connect with Burgoyne's army, I think, and sever that New England colonies. And then it's all too powerful. Can you imagine as the combined force of Burgoyne and Howe coming south to face Washington?
Yeah, I think that was definitely William Howe's biggest flaw is he really didn't understand what the center of gravity was for the American cause. He thought it was cities like New York or Philadelphia, but it was actually the Continental Army that kept the Revolutionary War alive. So now moving into
the question on you. Can I turn the question on you? Would you? I know you're a student of this war. So did he miss a chance in 1777?
I'm kind of there with you. I think he had his chances, but he kind of let it slip away. And then by the time Washington's retiring towards Valley Forge, it's kind of too late for him to do anything. Well, the previous year, he could have kept going, before allowing Washington to escape into Pennsylvania or even getting to him in Pennsylvania. But yeah, with the victory in the north at Saratoga and Burgoyne's surrender, it's very possible that it was too much already, and the Americans were able to survive another year because of that. But thinking about that now, going down a rabbit hole, if the Continental Army is completely destroyed or routed even more so than it had been and was unable to recover, would France come into the conflict, in the beginning of 1778, despite the victory at Saratoga?
No, I mean, I think I mean, if you read some of the accounts from the European court, I mean, Germantown has almost as much weight as Saratoga. I mean, Saratoga, yes, is a defining moment over Burgoyne, and it's definitely one of the turning points of the American Revolution. But the war lasts, we look at turning points after the fact. I mean, and Germantown, just having the ability to bring the Army back on the field and being almost so successful. Washington is not lucky. I mean, the weather, the decision to revert back instead of leaving Clive in your rear and continue to go, and then the accidental shooting in the two divisions by friendly fire, which is one of the weirdest terms ever used in a military engagement. But yeah, I mean, Washington's Army, Washington is the revolution. I mean, that's quite simple. I mean, and the capture of Washington is the capture of the rebel leader. I think, well, yeah, destroying the Continental Army, the French do not come in. Seeing that Washington has the ability to continue to strive and continue to stay on the field is the reason that the French ultimately, yeah, do come in. And then Washington is obviously nervous because he doesn't want the French to see exactly how desperate the situation is, and that's why he will meet with the French way away from his army initially to kind of ease them into what's happening. Lafayette also plays a major role, I think, in as well, and so forth, of easing that way for the French to recognize. Let's be honest, the French don't need too much provocation. I mean, the English are their mortal enemies, so all they need is a glimmer of a hope to get back at their British counterparts.
All right, so now we'll move into the actual encampment at Valley Forge. So along with these military failures of that year that Washington and his army have faced, what are the problems, i.e. logistical problems, that they're going to be facing at the beginning of the encampment?
Well, so there's about 12,000 men that march in, and one of the famous paintings that I like that's actually in the book there is the Trago painting where they show the men marching in the Valley Forge, and you see that some are stockings are worn, shoes are out. They all still have muskets, but they're in a motley collection of uniforms, and they're still there. They're still an army. So, but one of the big issues moving in is that there is going to be a lack of logistical, like you said, logistical support. There's a quartermaster, Thomas Mifflin, who has become very disenfranchised with George Washington. He is very upset that Washington has grown very close to Nathaniel Greene. And so he resigns and goes home. And Congress dithers and dallies about his replacement. So you're almost looking for about 3 to 4 months not having an active quartermaster to be in charge of supplies during a winter encampment. You're also going into an area that ironically, we always believe that Valley Forge was destitute of supplies. The region was picked clean. No, the region actually had the crops to support. The issue is that the continental currency is depreciating. And so a lot of these local populace is willing to run the risk of going into Philadelphia to sell to the British. They're going to give them hard specie instead of this paper dollar. In addition, so the men are going in. There's also initially a lack of hand saws or instruments to build the wooden cabins that they need. And so as these men move in, and then as they settle in the winter encampment with the lack of fresh produce and so forth, you see the advent of a multitude of diseases and ailments that come in. And so then you have the strain on the medical department. And so you start to see the deterioration. The men still have muskets, they still got ammunition, but they're lacking the necessities that make an army go. The quartermaster, the commissary, which is different, commissary general, quartermaster, the splitting up, and also just the supply chain. So there's a big gap in that as Washington's army moves into Valley Forge.
All right, so what does the actual encampment look like? What conditions are these men, living in? What shelters are they living in?
Initially, there's tents or whatever they can get, but they quickly mandate the size of the wooden lodges or the wooden huts that they're going to build, and they spring up rather quickly. I think there's about 1,300 huts that will be built throughout the encampment. So about 12,000 soldiers come in. about 10,000 effective, what we call effective military strength, and about 2,000 personnel, including up to a few hundred women as well that are coming in with the encampment. And so Washington mandates how the hut should be built, what their specifications, how many men to a hut, what they should use for insulation between the wooden logs, the fire, and then also he gives a $100 bonus to the units that can come up with the best alternative to how to cut and prepare these wood, and also for the first huts that can be constructed. And so what happens is you see them by division, these men start setting up these basically small little villages, lining up huts. One of the things that later on, and we'll talk about this guy Baron von Steuben, is also the laying out of the encampment, how the rows of huts from enlisted back to the general officers, also where to put things like the privy or the 25 ovens that'll be constructed to bake bread. These are things that the Army doesn't really have a full grasp on as they march in the Valley Forge, and they're going to learn this, unfortunately, to the detriment of those rank and file who are going to suffer while the Army learns how to coalesce around a winter encampment. So there is a range, there are readouts. There's approximately, I think, 5 different readouts built with artillery to support and protect the encampment from any potential British excursion. But most of the forces are going to dedicate themselves to building as quickly as they can, moving from tents into wooden cabins to survive the winter.
Okay, so before you mentioned Thomas Mifflin and how he's going to resign his post as Quartermaster General before the winter, who replaces him? And what do they do to remedy the situation?
So first of all, the Washington will actually go to the gentleman that Mifflin has a real big issue with, and that is Nathaniel Greene, the Rhode Island general, who is quickly becoming kind of Washington's go-to man. I mean, he will actually be sent south in 1780 to, and I say he's probably the best general outside of Washington in the Continental Army, which might pose some comments to come out here. But Nathaniel Greene doesn't want it initially. I mean, as he says, when have you ever seen a quartermaster in history, remembered in history? But Washington probably leans on him to the point that the necessity of it. So what he does is go around trying to rectify simple solutions, just oversight, rectifying where these accounts are. He also starts to realize that the issue too is communication in certain standards. There are wagons that are sitting ready to be pulled, and there are supplies in other places that are basically rotting. And so trying to connect these two. And also he has a great 2 subordinates underneath him. There's also there's a Trumbull, or is his name, the governor's son out of Connecticut. He's trying to resign as well because he's fed up with the system. And so Greene's big goal is basically to kind of merge all these different accounts together to provide these depots so food can start to flow in, supplies can start to flow in by wagon in the Valley Forge, and also setting it up for the next campaign, depots along the route of potential movements by Washington's army. And that's one of the big things, not only thinking now, but thinking in the future as well. Problem is that it's about 3.5, 4 months before his commission as Quartermaster General is approved or discussed in the Continental Congress. So the issue is that you have 3.5 months of men suffering while Mifflin is sitting in his home in Pennsylvania, going on to other matters, which I mean he's more famous for in this winter.
And Nathaniel Greene is definitely the one who's remembered for essentially, you can say, saving this army, at least when it comes to food and clothing and to having them supplied. But there's another man who really is kind of lost to history, who is right up there on the level of importance of Nathaniel Greene, and that's the man who becomes Commissary General, Jeremiah Wadsworth, a civilian, not a military man. So it's really a kind of a 2-man effort to supply this army and keep it fed and clothed.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's the money that's pumped in by Greene and then civilian Wadsworth, they're the yeoman service that, as the great Napoleon once said, an army marches on its stomach. Well, it also has a winter encampment needs to survive on its stomach. And so these are the thankless jobs. And I mean, initially, some of these gentlemen are even afraid to reach the encampment because of the ill will. I mean, they're blamed for things beyond their control initially. And so it is, the hard part is the movement. trying to, they even entice or coerce wagon masters to bring the food in because the currency is depreciating. And yeah, there's major issues that are, I mean, you can delve into some of the greater books on Valley Forge, talk about, yeah, the issues of just the supply chain. So yeah, Walsworth is one of those guys like Greene who don't get written about at this time in history because no one really thinks about that part of the military.
So back on the topic of Thomas Mifflin, since we mentioned him, let's talk a little bit about the Conway Cabal. Now, the name is obviously a lot more dangerous than this cabal actually was. So tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So there's a great book that just came out of a guy named Leonard Cabal. He's trying to undiscover the story. And really, it's a kind of hodgepodge of interactions that happen of people that are anti-Washington. There's a real anti-Washington clique. Obviously, Horatio Gates, the hero of Saratoga, star is rising. There are some that believe that he should take over command of the Continental Army, come towards Washington. The Cabal is named after Conway. He's an Irish-born French officer who has served well in the Continental Army, but he's also very eager about his self-promotion. And so he is initially, one of his letters it's rerouted, is discussed publicly. Washington's attention is brought to it. Conway is actually then promoted into the Inspector General position. Washington, of course, is frustrated with that because Conway is not the guy he wants in that position. Then you have this formation of the Board of War with Horatio Gates, Thomas Mifflin, Timothy Pickering, and I forget the fourth gentleman off the top of my head right now. But the Secretary, James Wilkinson, who actually keeps this conversation going by getting drunk one night and telling an aide of Lord Sterling what was going on about the communication. And then, so what you have is that you have this big issue of a power struggle. But what Lender says, the author in that book, is that all these gentlemen, their goal is to win the American Revolution. It's not like they wanted to usurp power and then sue for peace. It was that they were upset with the direction in Washington and maybe some of the facilitation of command and so forth. At the same time, Washington's kind of between a rock and a hard place because he's trying to show how dire the straits are with the Continental Army at Valley Forge, but he can't communicate that directly to the Continental Congress because he's afraid of word leaking out, getting back to the British, and the British having a winter movement to actually, and would be the death knell of his army. And so you basically have this campaign that happens behind the scenes. Washington uses one of his staff officers, John Laurens, whose father happens to be the president of the Continental Congress, Henry Laurens. And so they're able to navigate through. So a lot of people have made a big issue about this cabal. What it does is just basically diverts attention away from other issues that are affecting the rank and file. And that's what I try to explain in my book, that Washington navigates and shows a political savviness to basically give enough rope for both Gates, Mifflin, and Conway to eventually hang themselves. And he's also able to use a guy named Baron von Steuben to move him in as Assistant Inspector General and then get him to come to Valley Forge. And he allows a lot of his supporters to wage this letter writing conquest for him. And I think Conway actually ends up fighting a duel with Cadwalader or one of them. But the cabal is never very organized. It's not like a succinct group that's ready. It's just a lot of folks that are in either in the Continental Congress or these military leaders that are kind of frustrated with Washington's management of the war effort so far and thinking a change needs. And Gates has just won his big victory in New York, and he is kind of this the star that is ascending. Let's bring him south and replace Washington and revitalize the war effort. Most people, they're even writing to the Continental Congressman that 1777 would build on the campaign, would build on the victories that ushered in Trenton and Princeton, and that this would be the year that the war would end. Instead, you see Washington's army defeated again at Brandywine, the Battle of the Clouds, the Paoli massacre, or the engagement of Paoli, and then Germantown.
Yeah, so in the end, it was a whispering campaign. there was no real move to remove Washington from command. And I know when Gates finds out from Washington that, he knows what's going on, Gates is essentially going to put his tail between his legs and pledges undying support to Washington, that he is not part of any faction.
Oh yeah, no, quickly. And yeah, he's also was shunted off to like Boston by early 1778. They also try to manipulate what the Marquis de Lafayette. The Americans, we have this fascination with invading Canada, and they're ready to invade Canada again. They figured they send Lafayette up there, remove him. Baron de Cobb goes up, Thomas Conway, and realize it's completely fruitless. And Lafayette bucks the whole plan by saying that he's not going to do it unless he's given control through Washington and his honor and so forth. But yeah, there's a lot of smoke. There's not a lot of fire. It's a lot of disgruntledness, a lot of some personal vendettas, and it's also when the Congress sends a committee out to Valley Forge and they actually walk the fields and see what's happening at the winter encampment. As Gouverneur Morris says, it's like an army of skeletons, and they realize what Washington is hampering. Now, what's interesting at the same time is that it also aids Washington's persona with the army, because Washington stays in Valley Forge, and as he's fighting this letter campaign, his soldiers see that Washington is still in the encampment. So this winter, although he gains control in the political realm by obviously showing a political deftness that he would need as president, he also solidifies his kind of leadership with the Continental Army. He suffers with them without even going into the snow and kneeling and praying like that famous painting. So he can do that without kneeling in the snow and getting cold.
Yeah, so ironically, this cabal actually does more for Washington in his favor than for Conway, Gates, and their crew. And especially, coming the next June, 1778, when the American army ends up holding the field outside of Monmouth Courthouse, it's really going to make Washington untouchable.
Yes, and that's the thing. I think if you don't have Washington's solidification during the cabal, that the court martial of Charles Lee might have been slightly different. Because the one, he has a case with the first few points, but it's that third point or fourth point that is that that Washington's untouchable by that time. And he's built it up and showing that what happened during the winter, that the people who have tried to usurp him have never been organized enough. And Washington has this, I don't know how he does it sometimes, keeping up this facade. And while people are just throwing rotten fruit at his personality or his reputation.
So speaking on Washington now, he's not the only Washington that's there in camp during the winter at Valley Forge. In February, his wife, Martha, actually arrives, and she plays a fairly significant role in taking care of the army as well.
Sure, yeah. Now, this is when I worked at George Washington Birthplace, they would always come up with what was Washington's home life like, because we don't really know a lot about George Washington and Martha Washington's relationship, because when he dies in 1799, she burns what she believes is all the correspondence. I think 3 or 4 letters survived because they fell behind a drawer at Mount Vernon. But what happened? But this testament that Martha Washington travels to Valley Forge, and I think every winter in the war travels to be with George, is a testament of that powerful relationship. Because it's not just like, hey, I'm going to get on a Southwest plane and fly into Philadelphia or take the interstate. It's treacherous, even from Mount Vernon to Valley Forge by wagon in the middle of the winter, with the countryside in certain areas being unpredictable. She arrived there, she provides a great relief to Washington himself because she brings an air of that domesticity to the headquarters. So she's able to kind of provide a hostess, and Washington can have these meals or have a retreat to the bedroom and have a little bit of the quiet time, the conversation with Martha, a little bit of that homeness there. She also, the knitting and the presence around camp, there's just simple little things that aren't beneath her, knitting of stockings or providing the chance to for other officers' wives to be part of this circle. So she really takes on the role as the commander-in-chief's wife seriously. And that's not a very easy matter for Martha Washington, because she is from that plantation elite. And so some of these things she takes on is things she's never done before in her life. And so she provides that air of the home front, but she also provides a motherly figure for the encampment, and she also provides a tangible as well with helping knit and helping provide relief. Supposedly also she provided a shawl to a lady named Holly Cooper, who was an Oneida Native American lady who also felt welcomed in the encampment later on in May of 1778, and provided a kind of cooking demonstrations for the Army on how to use corn husks and so forth to make different soups that kept heart and soul together.
Right. So throughout this entire 6-month span, were all the troops encamped at Valley Forge for the entire winter? Were they elsewhere too?
No, so the majority of the Army will be at Valley Forge, but there are detachments that will serve. And Washington, unfortunately, has to send some troops out to actually be a net to keep supplies from going into Philadelphia. So there are roving patrols that are out there, but there's also a contingent of some of his crack troops, the Maryland line, with what's left of the Delaware line as well in Wilmington under William Smallwood. So I think it's about 1,500 soldiers that are protecting that area for the Continental Army. So there are troops, so the majority of the armies at Valley Forge, there are ones in supporting roles around Philadelphia, but there's also a encampment at Wilmington. And a good friend and a great historian, Travis Shaw, wrote one of the appendices in the Winter that Won the War about that encampment. So there are some signs and some notes, but some of his crack troops, the Marylanders and Delaware's units, are at Wilmington during the winter of 1777, 1778. So unfortunately, they do miss out on the training that von Steuben will undertake.
So speaking of von Steuben, one of the most remembered things about Valley Forge is Baron von Steuben's training of the Army. So what were some of his methods? What did he bring to the table? And what else did he do besides just drilling?
So von Steuben arrives in the winter encampment. He's not a baron of the Prussian military. I think he is a baroncy from some small German principality. He doesn't speak English when he arrives. One of the anecdotes is that he actually has a staff officer who he will tell to cuss or swear at the men in English when they've upset him. And so it provides a little bit of comic relief because some of the American soldiers actually teach him his first English words, and you can predict what words the soldiers taught von Steuben first. So von Steuben brings a perspective. He has been raised in the Prussian military. He has served in different roles throughout his life, and he realizes early on that the American psyche is different than the psyche of the volunteer or the peasant or the conscript that serves in these great armies on the continent. That you can't just beat the message in to these soldiers because there's a little more of this freedom aspect to the continental soldier. And so what he realized is that you have to, you have to educate, but kind of explain what's going on. And so he realizes that let's take bring a model company together. They will train in these fields. The fields are preserved at Valley Forge National Historical Park today. There's a nice new monument that looks out over the field, which I think is probably pretty accurate depiction of what von Steuben would have been seeing every day. And then he trains these soldiers, and then these model companies go back and teach the units, and then it kind of extrapolates through. So it's an amazing training concept. He develops a handbook, the Blue Book, that is still carried on throughout the ages in military history. But he sets up how the Army should encamp, where they should build latrines, how the rows of the military cabins should be, the rows and access between cabins and through these military encampments. Von Steuben will provide and become another Washington trustworthy general staff officer. It's also a win for Washington in the winter because the Congress initially mandated that the Inspector General would report directly to them, especially when they thought Thomas Conway was going to give that position. But von Steuben also paves the way because some of the greatest European volunteers will either serve without pay or serve at a lesser rank, or like von Steuben have his expenses paid for, and so he doesn't push the envelope. So he's more accepted in that way than some of the other European officers who are thinking they're coming to command these large units and have these major generalships, and which causes waves of discontent for the native-born continental officers who see these people as usurpers. So von Steuben eases the route through. He provides a modicum of drill and instruction, from the 12 steps of loading a musket to how to turn from column to line, things that John Adams, the previous summer when the Continental Army marched through Philadelphia on the way to Brandywine, said that they marched through, but they didn't have that military air. And that is something that von Steuben gives them, is that military air that they can go out and have that confidence. And so for all the tangible things that von Steuben does, it's the intangibles that he brings as well that you don't know about, but the boost of morale. And he's also able to withstand, he's able to do it day in and day out, even though there are soldiers that will hang on the edges of the training field and poke fun at what's going on. But von Steuben is another one of those heroes that emerges from the Valley Forge encampment.
Yeah, I know von Steuben was later recorded as saying that anybody could have done with the Continental Army what he did that winter, but obviously history has remembered that differently.
Yeah, I mean, that speaks to his personality and so forth. I mean, even his service in 1780 in Virginia in 1781, by continuing to train and try to provide supplies and soldiers and reinforcements for Greene and Lafayette's campaigns, show his commitment to the Continental cause. So yeah, he is one of those guys that might not have officially been a baron, but definitely deserved all the accolades on this side of the pond.
Even though I know Thomas Conway had said that, he could have trained the army in a month, as long as it would take Steuben to train them in 6 months. But so now moving on, talk a little bit about the British presence, less than 20 miles away in Philadelphia. Did the British ever actually threaten the encampment?
I mean, William Howe, by that time, they did not, there's no big strike to affect the encampment. Howe is in the process of resigning his commission. He knows he's going to be facing backlash when he returns to England. He's ensconced in the city of Philadelphia. His initial efforts in October of 1777 are to remove the impediments of Fort Mifflin and Fort Mercer south of Philadelphia, so the Delaware River can be opened for the British Navy to resupply and to provide support and contact. He also, but his also role is to try to provide food and fodder, consolidate what he has. There's not a major push until near the end of the encampment in May of 1778, when he gets word that the Marquis de Lafayette is going to take about a force out to determine British intentions. And then Howe sees this as a potential coup, that if he could capture Marquis de Lafayette, the most famous French national that is fighting for the rebellious colonies, that it might ease the reception he's going to receive back in England. So he does make a very forced and very determined effort to capture Lafayette's forces at what we call the Battle of Baron Hill. But Lafayette's able to escape the entrapment, probably because of the 3 different things. And I know we can discuss Baron Hill here in a few minutes, but the action that goes on really during the year is this petite theater war that goes on between the lines as both sides try to stop the flow of supplies. But Howe is very conventional, so there's not a real big forced movement during the winter. And for Americans, it's probably a great thing because of how the situation is such deteriorating through the winter for the Army for the most part.
And so we had a question from Robert Ryan in our chat. He says, when did the Continental Army actually start receiving French material, culture, and supplies?
So news arrives obviously of the French the alliance, or the Treaty of Amity that happens. They will start coming in into the spring. So the spring shipments in 1778, they'll start arriving. Washington will go. Later on, we'll meet with the French. I think in Hartford, Connecticut, the first time he meets the Comte de Rochambeau. There is some supplies that is given to that first joint effort between the Continentals and the French. I think it's at Newport or the Rhode Island campaign under Sullivan. But yeah, the news arrives, but it's going to take till the ships can be fitted, get through around Great Britain and reach the United States, 6 weeks to 3 months. So you're not going to see it during the Valley Forge encampment, but there's supplies. And also what's more important is the war chest or the loans that come, the money to continue to buy. Washington is more concerned of actually having an army and creating a continental army and having longer enlistments. And this will help. The French money will help quicker than the Charleville muskets or the ammunition initially does.
Yeah, and even in 1776, there's covert aid coming in from the French. Tens of thousands of muskets, uniforms, rounds of ammunition, basically sent over under the front of like a fake Spanish shipping company because it's I can't remember it off the top of my head. Yeah. But yeah, because the French obviously at that point are trying to remain neutral still. So there's no open actual material aid. And that doesn't come until, like Phil was saying, with February 6, 1778, when the treaties of amity and commerce as well as alliance are signed.
There's also there's an illicit trade going on already through the West Indies, the Dutch West Indies, and so forth. There's but there's also the clamping down. St. Eustatius gives the first salute to the United States flag, and then they're quickly subdued by the British. They're a Dutch colony. There is some legal under, like as Billy was saying, under a fake company. I think it's the Count de Beaumarchais, who later on writes a famous play or something that's fronting this. But yeah, it'll take a little bit while for French stuff to filter in, and also we can't forget about the Dutch who provide loans as well. John Adams actually goes to the Dutch and is able to negotiate a sizable loan, I believe, that also will filter in the American way.
All right, so this is one thing I think people always wonder. So the winter of 1777 to 78 was not the worst winter during the American Revolution. It was not the worst winter encampment. Why is it the only one that is widely remembered?
So I will have to give credit to the great historian that is at Morristown National Historic Park, Park Ranger Eric Olson, who said that the reason that Morristown is not known, taking this question, flipping it, is that Morristown was just too successful and not enough people died. And that is the major role, is that the Valley Forge had the highest death total of any of the 8 winters that the Revolutionary Army spent during the war. Approximately 1,700 men passed away. They learned that they don't know the rudiments of a winter encampment. If you look at the years previous, Washington's army is not the size that they are now. They spend their first winter, people are coming and going in Boston in 1775, 1776. The winter of 1776, 1777, he has a very small force that is able to camp throughout the town of Morristown. And most of them are inoculated for smallpox during that winter, so they are housed in quarantine places. So by 1777, 78, this is the first major winter encampment that the army will go through. And so, yes, it is known because of the immense suffering. But what they learned from that will help them survive. They're very lucky that the next winter, the one they spend in Morristown, did not happen first, because it is colder. There's a lot more snow. But the army is better prepared for it because they went through the trials and tribulations at Valley Forge. The men are now inoculated for smallpox. They know how to build their encampments. There's a better supply. I want to say better. There is a better supply chain. Not that it's efficient, but it's better. And they are a more trained force. So not as many soldiers. Less than 200 die at Morristown, where you have 1,700 die at Valley Forge. So it's really the death and suffering as the army learns to be an army in a winter encampment that makes Valley Forge stick out. And also it's the fictions of von Steuben or the the political intrigue. It's kind of an intersection of all these things happening, and the Army maneuvers through and picks the right route each time.
All right, so the winter is over now. Spring is sprung. Why does the Army end up leaving Valley Forge?
I mean, well, they probably couldn't leave fast enough. No, the issue too is obviously is the British, the war. Now the war has changed with the advent of the French. The war has expanded not only on the 13 colonies, the British have to worry about their other colonial possessions, and so we have this exalted view as Americans that the 13 colonies were the most important in the British Empire. It's actually not. They actually detached, I think, 5,000 soldiers to the Caribbean to protect some of those islands there. So Clinton, Sir Henry Clinton, who replaces William Howe as the commander of British forces in North America, has been told to evacuate Philadelphia to hold on to New York City because they cannot keep both. And so Clinton's army will start to move. Now, Washington has determined how will Clinton's army go? What's the route to get there? And with so many loyalists and other camp followers going on with Clinton, the army moves across New Jersey. So Washington will send out an initial force, and then the rest of the army will follow. So around as they leave exactly 6 months to the day, December 19th, June 19th, head out of Valley Forge in pursuit of the British Army, which they do meet the rear guard at a place called Monmouth, with I think somebody wrote a book for the Emerging Red War series about. And it's 9 days after the encampment. I think tomorrow is the anniversary of the battle. And so, yeah, they eventually move out to fight what is the last major engagement in the Northern Theater for the Revolutionary War. And I think it's still one of the hottest days of any engagement of an American army in history. But I'll interview you for that book and for that Red War Revelry.
All right, so now kind of beginning to wrap this up. Title of your book is The Winter That Won the War. And why is this the winter that won the war?
Kind of a surmise. It's a testament to that there is an army that comes out of the winter. There is the formation of an actual army. And you see that initially, one of the chapters I made sure I included was the Battle of Barren Hill, which is although small engagement. It showed that for the first time that the practice and the military training that Baron von Steuben undertook actually took hold, because it's an engagement where Lafayette defies his orders. He takes a fixed position. The British are about to surround him. Daniel Morgan's riflemen, Oneida Native Americans, are there to provide great skirmishing activity to delay, but the army marches away, retreats in order across the Schuylkill River, and leaves the British on the other side. And so right there is a testament of why this is the winter that won the war, because this is a force that did not skedaddle. This is a multicultural force that marches out of Valley Forge. It also, Washington has cemented his leadership over it. They've created a nucleus, but they've learned by the time that they get to a very tough winter the next year that how to survive the winter. And the force that fights at Monmouth shows as well that the training has sunk in. And this is an army that is going to persevere. And so it's not a turning point. It's more of you have 3 or 4 different causes going on at Valley Forge, and they could have gone disparate, very separate ways. And each time the right choice was made. Washington with the military training, or Washington with the politicalness, or the quartermaster department, or the commissary officer being re-energized, or the rank and file getting, the rank and file is still there. And so that is why I feel like this is the winter that won the war, because all these components make up, and any one of them could have tripped the complete effort and caused maybe a multitude of failures down the road, but each one led to a more successful outcome. And so that's why I view this as the winter that won the war.
Nicely said. So somebody picks up your book, they're going to see that there is a whole bunch of different sites that they can visit and take this book out to with them to tour. Out of all the sites in this book and all the sites associated with Valley Forge that you've been to, what is your favorite site?
Oh, let's see. Great question. Actually, my favorite site, I'll pick 2. My favorite site inside Valley Forge National Historical Park is actually the Potts House. When you walk down You can walk into the room and realize, I don't know, I just envisioned when I was there, Washington pacing the floor back and forth with knowing that he's between a rock and a hard place, that he's trying to talk to the politicians, he's trying to keep, you can see the suffering going on. And here he is in this bleak kind of valley, trying to survive this winter, wondering what is he doing, type thing. And so that is one of my favorite spots, because the Park Service does open up the house, you can walk through and so forth, and just visualizing that you're in Washington's footsteps through this momentous winter. And then also too is I do like compatibility with the small engagement at the Battle of Barron Hill, because you can the St. Peter's Lutheran Church there. There's a historic Pennsylvania historic trail marker, or the commission marker there. Inside the cemetery is a plaque to commemorate the 6 Oneida Native Americans who died in the engagement there, skirmishing the British, who walked within 30 days from New York to the Valley Forge campaign to fight for a cause that and eventually cost them their homeland. But just an interesting story that gets largely forgotten and scrolled up, because these signs are right here in plain sight, but people drive through them all the time around Lafayette Hill and the St. Peter's Church. So being able to show that and getting people out to those, uncovering history right before your eyes. And that's kind of what's exciting about emerging Red War, is turning these places we see every day on commutes or so forth into the historical significance that is right there, that this can still be preserved if people just pay attention to it.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, Phil. So if you are interested in picking up Phil's new book, Winter That Won the War, it's out now on our publisher's website, savasbeatty.com. I don't think it comes out for the other retailers until the end of the month, or end of July. So if you want your copy right now, visit the publishers.
Or if anyone listens in or whatever, if they write to Emerging Red War, you can get a signed copy. We haven't, just go to the blog, send an email to the group, to the email account there. I will get a signed copy, and there's a slight discount if you have listened and dealt with me for this last hour. You get a slight discount if you write to the Emerging Revolutionary War at gmail.com. I will send you a copy, a signed copy, for a small discount, which you'll find out if you email. So a little incentive for people who tuned in tonight.
That's right, exclusive benefits. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And you can join us for a special interview on Monday, July 5th, as we sit down with Bob Hoare of Bennington Battlefield State Historic Site to discuss the 250th anniversary of the Breckinridge Standoff, something I bet most of you haven't heard of. I know I never did. It is the first armed confrontation between New York and settlers of what would eventually become the state of Vermont. So tune in for that, July 5th, 7 o'clock, right here on our Facebook page. Thank you again, Phil, and thank you, everyone, for tuning in.
Thanks, Billy. Have a good night, everyone.